Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to get started. My name is Amy Forbes. I'm the training manager with the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, South Asian America Considerations for Mental Health Practitioners with Atrayee Mukherjee. Please know this webinar is being recorded. A certificate of attendance will be emailed to those who registered and attended, and we are not able to offer CEUs for this webinar. I'm going to give a brief overview of our network and some important information before we get started today. The Mental Health Technology Transfer Center is a nationwide network supported by SAMHSA. Our network includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office out of Stanford University. Our Northwest MHTTC covers HHS Region 10, which includes Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington State. Our goals at the Northwest MHTTC are to support mental health-related evidence-based practices, heighten awareness, knowledge, and skills of the behavioral health workforce, foster alliances and address diversity of training needs, and to offer free publicly available training and technical assistance. Our areas of focus are in evidence-based practices for psychosis, which include CBTP and assertive community treatment, which is ACT. We also provide many other trainings, so you can please check those out on our website. You can also register for free webinars there, watch a recorded webinar, take a free online self-paced course with healthy knowledge. You can also sign up for our weekly newsletter, review our resource library, or listen to our podcast called Putting It Together. And before we get started, I'm just going to let you all know we will send out a link to the recording, today's webinar slides, as well as your certificate of attendance within a couple of weeks after this event. For communication during this event, please use the chat box if you need to reach out to any of our staff, or if you would like to share your respectful comments, greetings, and observations with everyone here. Please use the Q&A box to type your questions for our presenter. You can do this at any point throughout the presentation. We will be monitoring the Q&A box to facilitate answering as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And also at the end of today's event, we will send out a link to our survey. Please do know that your feedback is very important to the work that we do. We are required by SAMHSA to conduct this survey, yet they do not have an official position on the content. And now I would like to welcome and introduce all of you to today's presenter, Atrayee. Atrayee is a first-generation Indian immigrant and mental health practitioner. She received her undergraduate and graduate education from Indiana University in Bloomington. Through her experience as an international student, Atrayee became aware of the need for culturally sensitive therapeutic services for immigrant communities. She specializes in working with the South Asian community and queer community and provides therapeutic services in English, Hindi, and Bengali. So I am going to stop sharing and hand things over to you, Atrayee. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for attending. Like Amy already mentioned, my name is Atrayee. I am a mental health practitioner. I work out of Seattle, Washington. I work at an Asian American nonprofit called Asian Counseling and Referral Service. And I specialize in working with Asians and Asian Americans generally, but have a subspecialty in working with the South Asian community. I moved to the US at age 18 for college. And like Amy mentioned, I attended Indiana University Bloomington and got both my undergraduate in psychology as well as my graduate education in mental health counseling. and through my experiences became interested in working with the South Asian community, as well as the immigrant community, because I saw a broader lack of culturally competent services and resources that fit our needs. Um, so I'm going to share my screen. Um, okay. Amy, can you confirm that you can see that?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great. Um, okay, yes. So I will be talking about the South Asian community, and then towards the end of the presentation, I'll be talking about the mental health needs of our community, as well as some clinical considerations, some clinical recommendations from my own practice. Um, okay, so this is an overview of what's coming up. Um, Yeah, and I just want to provide a disclaimer up front. So this webinar is designed to give you an understanding, um, a working understanding of the South Asian community, especially if you're more unfamiliar with this community in general. I will be talking about some historical background, but I don't have any training as a historian. Um, and I'm not able to provide any in-depth information about the very rich history of South Asia. This is a very large and very diverse region. Um, so I will provide some resources towards the end that you can refer back to. Um, my aim here is to educate you as a clinician um, about the mental health needs of South Asians. And yeah, if you're working with a client of this culture, I would highly recommend that you seek out cultural consultation. I'll talk more about this as we go on, but um, South Asia is such a diverse region. Every state in India, which is where I'm from, has a very unique culture, can have different languages, different cultural practices. So what might be applicable to me or another South Asian might not be applicable to your clients. Um, yeah, okay. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about my clinical orientation, just to inform this conversation, and especially inform the later slides about um, clinical recommendations. So I use an eclectic approach. I have been trained as an interpersonal therapist, and I use a lot of attachment-based strategies. I like to examine my clients' early life experiences as well as their childhood bonds. And I think that this approach lends itself well to working with the South Asian community because it is such a collectivist culture, and family relationships can be very important. Um, I also lean on narrative approaches to help clients rewrite and reauthor their life stories, their life perspectives, life experiences, and also work from an existential perspective to help my clients make meaning of their lives. Um, and then, when appropriate, I do use a strengths-based approach to identify clients' resiliencies and clients' resources within their specific context. And again, I think this lends itself well to working with South Asians because I think there are so many important culturally embedded practices that we have within our community. Okay. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of this region, language, culture, and religion. This is in no way meant to be exhaustive. Like I've been mentioning, this is a very large, very diverse region. And I do also want to say up top, I am, like it's been mentioned before, I'm from India and know most about about my country and my community within that region. Um, there are several countries in South Asia, and again, I would encourage you to seek out more trainings and more resources regarding those countries, those unique cultures as well. Okay, with that being said, the South Asia is comprised of the southern sub-region of Asia, which comprises the modern-day states of Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And something that I came across when I was researching this is Afghanistan is considered to be at the crossroads of both Central Asia and South Asia. So if you do some research into this region, you'll find that some historians and geographers consider Afghanistan to be in Central Asia and some consider it to be in South Asia. And you'll find differing opinions among scholars. And something else I want to say about Afghanistan is that it also has a unique culture of its own that can have significant differences from the rest of the countries in this region. Okay. What I'm going to be talking about next is about language. The map that's depicted on the slide doesn't capture every single language or every single dialect that is spoken in this region. South Asia is home to quite literally thousands of dialects. As you can see, Hindi is spoken widely in the north of India. Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, Malayalam are some languages spoken in the south of India. Urdu is widely spoken in Pakistan. It's also spoken in parts of India. Bengali, which is my native language, is spoken in the western part of India as well as in Bangladesh. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the history of those regions. Another language from Bangladesh is Sylheti. Nepali is the official language of Nepal. Tamil and Sinhala are spoken in Sri Lanka. So this is very much a non-exhaustive list. And the languages that I mentioned fall into these broader language families. So the Indo-Iranic language family, the Dravidian language family, the Tibeto-Burman language family, and the Austroasiatic language family. English does serve as the lingua franca in many parts of South Asia due to the legacy of British colonization. And, as you can see, since so many different languages are spoken in this part of the world, to conduct official or government matters, English is often used in those contexts. Okay, and regarding religion, South Asia is the birthplace of four of the world's major religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, which is also called Sikhi, and Jainism. Three religions that come from West Asia and arrived later are Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And then Zoroastrianism, which was the major religion in modern-day Iran, also survives in India. I'm going to be talking a little bit about these different religions. I'm not a religious scholar or a theologian by any definition, but I'm going to be just providing a broad overview to create some understanding. So regarding Hinduism, unlike a lot of major religions in the world, Hinduism does not have a founder, but it rather evolved over time. Hinduism is also, or Hindu, the word Hindu is also an exonym, so it was a name given to adherents of this religion by people outside of it. And it's not only one religion, it's more thought of as a group of related beliefs. There are many different ways of seeing God or divinity in Hinduism. And you may have seen deities or images of gods and goddesses. Um, Different sects of Hinduism or different communities within Hinduism might worship a specific deity, god. Um, and I want to quickly touch on a few terms within Hinduism. So karma, which you might have heard, literally means action. To most Hindus, karma are performed in order to fulfill dharma, which also has many different meanings, including duty, merit, and the law. Within Hinduism, it is taught that every soul reincarnates, so the life cycle continues. And this is something that you might hear if you are working with Hindu clients, uh, especially if they are more religious. Regarding Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama, who later came to be known as the Buddha, was born in modern-day Nepal. Buddhists aim to rid themselves of attachment or clinging to earthly tethers, which is thought to be the root of all suffering. Buddhism did originate in the modern-day region of South Asia, but it has spread, especially to Southeast and East Asia as well. And then Jainism. Jainism arose in northern India around the same time as Buddhism did. The historical founder of Jainism is Mahavir. And one of the central tenets of Jainism is ahimsa, which means non-injury. Um, and if you've heard, I'm sure you've heard of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi's one of his primary beliefs was ahimsa, which inspired his nonviolent strategies. And then Sikhism or Sikhi was founded in the 16th century in the northwestern region of India, or India and Pakistan, known as Punjab. Punjab is part of both modern day India and modern day Pakistan. Sikhism is also known as Sikhi, and male adherents of Sikhi might wear a turban, which is called a dastar. And then regarding the Abrahamic religions, Islam originated in what is now Saudi Arabia, and Islam arrived to South Asia around the 8th century AD when Arabs traveled to what is now southern Pakistan. There is also a small Jewish community in India, especially in the south of India, in the region known as Cochin. And then Christianity arrived in India in the 2nd century. Zoroastrians, who are mentioned on the slide, arrived in India through refugees from Persia, which is now modern-day Iran. The Zoroastrian community in India is are referred to as Parsis, which of course for their origins in Persia. And this is also a pretty small community now. The next topic I want to touch on is caste. This is a very important topic to discuss. Caste is a social hierarchical structure existing in South Asia, with each caste having its own social and cultural practices. A person's caste, which is assigned at birth, affects their access to opportunities and resources. And this system affects over 1 billion people around the world. I wanted to include this because this, again, might play a role in the lives of your clients. I have heard, as someone from a caste privileged background, I have heard in the United States context that, caste is not really an issue, but I want to make it very clear that this is not true. Caste continues to be an issue to this day. A survey from 2003, which realize is dated, but I think this is still relevant. Reported that only 1.5% of Indian immigrants in the United States were Dalits or members of caste disprivileged backgrounds. And this is a study done by the Center for Advanced Study of India at the University of Pennsylvania. More than 90% were from dominant castes or privileged castes. And about 2.5 million people of Indian descent live in the US or born, including those born here. A 2018 survey reported that 26% said that they had experienced physical assault because of their caste, while 59% reported caste-based derogatory jokes or remarks directed towards them. More than half said that they were afraid of being outed as Dalit, which is a caste disprivileged caste. This is the only survey of its kind ever done. So this is something that needs to be studied more. It needs to be acknowledged more by our community, which is why I want to take some time to talk about this. The caste system and caste discrimination in the United States is enforced by caste privileged individuals. There are numerous accounts of caste discrimination from caste disprivileged communities in the US workplaces, notably at tech companies. In 2022, Google canceled a talk by Tanmari Soundarajan, who is an Indian American Dalit activist, due to claims of it being Hindu-phobic. And the caste privileged community continues to uphold these structures even outside of South Asia, and have hid under the guise of quote unquote Hindu-phobia and xenophobia in order to avoid discussions of caste and have silenced the voices of Dalit disprivileged activists. At the end of this slide deck, I've included a number of resources that you can refer back to that talk about caste. I've included a link to a talk about building caste equity in US academia that was facilitated by Tanmari and Darshana Mini. I've also included a link to Tanmari's book, The Trauma of Caste. And yeah, all of that should be at the end of this deck. And then recently in India, a group of Bahujan women who belong to a caste disprivileged background were asked to leave or reclaim the night Women's March in Mumbai. So I really want to emphasize that anyone insisting that casteism in South Asia or in the diaspora is resolved is just as diluted as people saying that racism in America is no longer an issue. And caste is not officially recognized by the law in the United States, except for in Seattle. In 2023, Seattle became the first US jurisdiction to add caste to its list of protected categories. In other states like California, it is implicitly covered under anti-discrimination laws. And the reason I mention this, and one of the implications of this is, say there are caste disprivileged people within a US context or a US workplace experiencing this kind of discrimination, and they report it to their bosses or managers who might not be familiar with this culture. It's quite hard for them to get any kind of recognition and for any kind of action to be taken. So this is something that might come up. And this is a quote from The Annihilation of Caste by B.R. Ambedkar, who was a very notable Dalit activist. I've included a link to this book again at the end of the slide deck. And I've included a link to an article that talks about the solidarity between the Dalit community and the Black community within the United States. This is a very important area to talk about, and I do hope that you take some time to refer back to those. Okay. Um, okay, next I'm going to talk about a very, very, very rudimentary timeline of the history of South Asia. Um, like I mentioned before, this region has a very rich history that is maybe beyond the scope of this seminar. And I urge you to look at more resources related to the history of this region if you're interested. So the colonization of the Indian subcontinent and of South Asia began from 1600 to 1650 with the establishment of European trading companies, most notably the East India Company, which was established by the British. Um, by 1858, British India was placed under crown rule. In historical accounts, this is referred to as the British Raj. Raj in Hindi means rule. Um, and by this point, the British ruled most of the subcontinent. Um, the independence movement within the subcontinent, began very, very early on. There were a lot of violent uprisings, and again, it is beyond the scope of this webinar, so I'm not able to get into it too much. But if this is an area that you're interested in, I would again highly urge you to look up more resources about that. 1947 is when the partition of India and Pakistan took place. This was the dissolution of the British Raj. And then 1971, Bangladesh gained independence from Pakistan, and 1972 is when Ceylon became Sri Lanka. Regarding partition, so as you can see, the Indian subcontinent was partitioned into two independent dominions, Pakistan and India. The region that you can see here was also part of Pakistan. So it was West Pakistan and East Pakistan, with India being in the middle. This led to a redrawing of political borders and the birth of two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. This is one of the deadliest mass migrations in recorded human history. And there's an estimates of the number of people who died during partition range from 200,000 to 2 million. And I also really want to stress the impact of colonization on this region cannot be overstated. British colonization led to uncountable deaths of South Asians. South Asia experienced several famines under British Raj, notably the Great Bengal Famine of 1943, which killed an estimated 3 million people. It led to the draining of our resources, the pillaging of our artifacts, many of which sit stolen in the British Museum in London to this day. And as I already mentioned, the partition of India and Pakistan took place in 1947, and the independence of Bangladesh took place in 1971, which was really not that long ago. And it would not be at all surprising if these events played a role in the lives of your clients and their families. Personally, 3 out of 4 of my grandparents were born in British India. And 2 of my grandparents directly lived through the partition of India, were Bengalis. So they had to move over from Bangladesh to present day India. So I'm only 2 generations removed from British colonization. Okay. And then regarding the migration to the United States, there's most of this information is from the book Our Stories: An Introduction to South Asian America that was published by the South Asian American Digital Archive, or SADA. I've put a link to that at the end of the slide deck as well if you're interested. It goes into a lot more detail about the factors that led to the migration of South Asians to the United States, and what that looks like in present day. Um, yeah, according to the 2010 census, more than 3.4 million people in the United States trace their ancestry back to South Asia. South Asians are one of the fastest growing immigrant groups within the US. Um, there is a noted presence since the 1700s, but a larger presence began since the late 1800s. There were a lot of early settlers from the regions of Punjab and Bengal. Something that I came across when I was researching this is there were a significant number of Hindu and Muslim Punjabi men that married Catholic Mexican immigrant women, especially in California. And there's a notable community of Punjabi Mexican Americans in that region. In 1923, the landmark case of the United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind, the US Supreme Court made South Asians ineligible from receiving citizenship and stripped citizenship from those who had already been granted it. And this law would be in effect for the next 2 decades until President Truman signed the 1946 Act, which granted citizenship to South Asians and Filipinos, but also limited the number of migrants. So it basically enforced a quota system. In response to the US civil rights movement, the US changed its discriminatory immigration laws. In 1965, the quota system was abolished, and it led to an increase of migrants from South Asia. And also, I want to take the time here to recognize and honor the contribution of Black civil rights leaders. It really cannot be overstated here. I've included again a few links to learn more about this and the solidarity between our communities at the end of the deck. Okay, so see if there are any questions. Okay. Do you have any experience or information pertaining to people of Indian descent to other countries during the British Raj? I'm Fijian Indian and would love to learn more. Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't personally have experience regarding this, but I have worked with clients who are Fijian Indian. Um, Fijian Indians have their own unique cultural practices that have evolved over time. Um, and the Indian diaspora in Fiji were taken there as indentured servants. There is a very painful history associated with that. In my clinical experience of working with this population, I noticed that there were so many linguistic differences between the way that I speak Hindi, which is one of the languages that I speak, and the Fijian Indian dialects. I think this is an area that also needs more representation within the US. Um, and yeah, something that needs to be studied more. The chat. Okay. Someone else asked, it seems like caste should be added to the protected classes when HR considers employment and discrimination and harassment claims. Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's a great point. It's definitely not something that is really talked about. And I think a lot of caste privileged people in the US try to shove it under a rug and not really deal with it, while still enforcing these discriminatory practices. Um, okay, great. Um, so I will continue. Um, Next, we're going to be talking a little bit about the mental health considerations. Something I want to mention here is there seems to be a lot of gaps in the literature on South Asia, on the scientific literature on South Asians, especially in the United States. A lot of the research is actually from the UK, which has a different relationship to the South Asian community. Something I've noticed in my time in the US um, is that the when people say Asian, they're more likely referring to East Asians, and South Asians often are excluded from Asian and Asian American spaces. And this is, I think, reflected in the research. A lot of the studies also center on Indian Americans or immigrants from India. So there needs to be, I think, more specific research about South Asians from other regions. And there are a lot of the studies that I reviewed had smaller sample sizes. So this is another area I think that needs to be explored. Yeah, and the first thing I wanted to talk about regarding mental health care is the stigma within the South Asian community associated with mental health and mental illness. Stigma has been repeatedly identified as a theme in the literature. It comes up in pretty much every study that I read. In one UK study, social stigma associated with mental health disorders kept people from consulting professionals, even for symptoms of dementia. So there seems to be a lot of barriers in the way for South Asians to actually access help for their mental health. Another thing that comes up a lot is mental health is often thought to reflect poorly on one's family or one's culture or one's community, and is thought to bring shame, seen as a sign of weakness. And it also seems like the South Asian community doesn't have a lot of trust in mental health professionals because they do not reflect their cultural values and, in fact, may behave in culturally insensitive ways. South Asians are more likely to go to providers who are also South Asian. And not having a South Asian provider, not having a provider from their specific culture, from their specific linguistic group can become a barrier to accessing mental health care. There's also a culture of secrecy around mental illness. Like I said, it's thought to kind of reflect poorly on the family or the community, so it's usually kept within the family and people are discouraged from bringing it up to professionals. And it is a highly stigmatized topic among South Asian communities. This is important to keep in mind when conducting outreach, especially is being aware that this is a community that can be hard to reach and tailoring outreach or clinical practices to their specific concerns. There were two themes that I identified in the literature about stigma. Overall, the help-seeking behavior is low due to the factors that I already mentioned. And then the two themes that came up is mental health might be attributed to life circumstances. So it's kind of an attitude of, oh, well, I might be having anxiety, I might be feeling sad or depressed, but that's just how life is. And to some extent, this shows up in a lot of different communities, but I definitely have seen this in my work is, what are you going to do by crying about it or being upset about it? This is just how life is. And it can keep people from accessing care for concerns that I think do need to be addressed. And then the other theme that I identified is seeing mental illness as attributable to karma or supernatural forces or due to sins from a past life. And like I put the disclaimer here, this might be a little bit more applicable to Hindu communities and to older individuals. But don't be surprised if this comes up, especially if you're working with Hindu communities and older folks. Um, and also just to expand on this a little bit, what I mean by karma and supernatural forces here is it might be thought of as a curse, like I might have done something in a past life that led to these symptoms. Um, so there might be some reluctance in recognizing kind of the forces within their life context that might be contributing or how they play a role in their mental health symptoms. This is also well established in the research about many different communities, many different immigrant communities, is the link between depressive symptoms and acculturative stress. So acculturative stress is the stress from maybe moving to a new country, moving to a new context, and having to assimilate or acculturate to some degree. This is something that I went through personally when I moved to the US for college. I didn't have any family here or any established friends. It was definitely ameliorated a little bit by the fact that I was in college. I was fluent in English, but it can be much, much more challenging if you don't have some of those privileges and advantages. Older age, literacy, financial difficulties, gender roles, perceptions of illness, social isolation, and poor physical health contribute to depressive symptoms as well. And then in a UK study, middle-aged Pakistani men and older Indian and Pakistani women reported significantly higher rates of depression and anxiety compared to their white counterparts, even after adjusting for socioeconomic status. And then other exacerbating factors can be stresses in familial relationships, aging, isolation, like I already mentioned, migration, stigma, economic difficulties, and discrimination. I'll talk more about discrimination a little bit later. Um, and I also want to take a little bit of time here to talk about the unique considerations in regard to South Asian women. So South Asian women have a higher susceptibility to self-harm, to insomnia, disordered eating, depression, and anxiety. There's a study from the UK that identified that South Asian women coming from more traditional homes, which might indicate lower acculturation, are more susceptible to eating disorders. Studies from the US, from the UK, and from Canada have found that culture conflicts play a role in the exacerbation of stress. And this is particularly related to intergenerational conflict. So maybe if someone has a parent who might have moved from South Asia, but they were born and raised in the West, there might be a clash of values. And this can be correlated with depression. And then in contrast to suicide rates in the West, so suicide rates in the West are higher among men. Suicide and self-harm is more prevalent among South Asian women. Another predictor of mental distress for younger South Asian women is a history of domestic violence. And studies have reported depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, loss of self-esteem, and then increased suicidality can result from verbal and physical abuse. There are several organizations that are geared towards South Asian men or South Asian women experiencing domestic violence. And then this is probably obvious to most people, but discrimination is also seen as a significant stressor that exacerbates acculturative stress, feelings of isolation, thereby exacerbating feelings of depression and anxiety. There are a few protective factors. The study that I reviewed um, reported that mental health symptoms associated with discrimination were also influenced by adherence to cultural values. So the study itself called it having traditional cultural beliefs. Um, and it's thought that it may serve as a protective factor to those reporting discrimination. It also may be related to stronger group affiliation and identification. So having members of your community around you can be protective. And it may serve to kind of insulate group members from discrimination-related stress and adverse mental health outcomes. I already mentioned this briefly, but South Asian communities are typically collectivist cultures. So there is a strong reliance on community, and this can be quite protective. Um, and also those individuals with adherence to their cultural values might have culturally embedded coping structures that might not be available to others. And then the degree of acculturation might not perceive discrimination in the same way. This has been found among other immigrant groups as well, that a higher degree of acculturation is associated with more uh, increased perception of discrimination. And this could also be by an increasing involvement in US cultural beliefs. This is something that I've experienced personally too. I've been in the US for a little over 10 years now. And I found that becoming more acculturated, becoming more familiar with American culture has changed my perceptions around discrimination. It's led to a finer attunement towards microaggressions or other discriminatory behaviors. I remember a specific incident when I am complimented on my English, which I speak completely fluently. I understand the subtext behind that, but when I've told my parents or my family members about these incidents, they don't live in the US and they don't really understand what that means and take it at face value since they don't have the same kind of socialization. I remember explaining this to a family member, and they were like, "Oh, well, it's just a compliment." Um, so yeah. And then another theme that's been identified by the research is somatization. So within South Asian communities, it's quite common to interpret mental health symptoms as physical illnesses. It's been identified as it can result from experiences of abuse. Um, so your clients might report things like sleep disruptions, bodily pains, gastrointestinal issues. Um, and yeah, mental health symptoms are often translated into physical terms. And then physical illnesses are taken a lot more seriously. They're seen as more concrete. So people might be more likely to seek help symptoms. I've noticed this personally with especially my older clients. Many of my clients express mental health symptoms in these physical terms. I'll hear kind of a vague description of dard, which is just pain in Hindi. They might not quite be able to explain where or why this is happening. They also might describe aches and pains, nausea, gastrointestinal distress, headaches. So this is something that might come up. And I think this is also helpful for for physical health doctors to be aware of, and maybe take into account that if related to mental health in addition to their physical health. Something I was asked to talk about is the role of the family within South Asian culture. Um, South Asian cultures, like I mentioned, are collectivist cultures. There is a strong emphasis on filial piety, so respect for your elders, not just your parents, not just your family, but anyone that's elder to you, older than you are. You're kind of obligated to respect them, to behave in certain ways around them. Um, there's a lot of pressure put on children from a young age, and this can be compounded by immigrant identity. What I mean by that is, if your parents have moved here and you're brought up in this environment, there may be additional pressure for you to kind of meet their expectations to, achieve the American dream in some way. Um, Familial pressures is seen as a stressor in the literature. This is another theme that emerges, especially among South Asian youth. There's also a culture of secrecy around sexual activity, dating, substance use, and this comes up a lot for South Asian women, especially. Um, and this last study here, conducted in 2015, examined how perfectionism and this kind of family pressure influences people in the future when they grow up. So feelings of anxiety, perfectionism, low self-esteem, and depression can result from this excessive familial pressure. Um, And something that these authors also talked about is maybe conducting parental workshops for South Asian clients, and emphasizing maybe the difference between having high standards and perfectionism. Because something that was identified in this research is people feeling like they consistently cannot meet the expectations of their family. Yeah. And next, I'm going to be talking about some clinical recommendations. So these are a collection of approaches that I use in my clinical work. They might not be applicable to your work or be appropriate for every client. So again, tailoring your approaches to your specific client, doing research about their unique cultural background is very important when working with any client. But so these are some clinical approaches that, again, that I use in my work. The first is expressing curiosity about your client's journey and about their relationship with their culture. Something that I avoid doing, and I have to consciously remind myself of this, is not making any kind of assumptions about a client just because they are South Asian, or even are the exact same background as I am. I'm Bengali, and even when I meet a Bengali client, there might be significant differences in our cultural experiences. So expressing curiosity about, what role does your culture play in your life? There are some clients who will say, yeah, I'm South Asian. I'm pretty kind of settled in my identity in that regard. They might have grown up in a community that is very South Asian centric, even within the US. And they might not have some of the identity conflicts that other clients might have. So kind of expressing curiosity about how they feel, about where they're at with their cultural growth, if that's something that they want to change. Something that I like to do also is nurturing a sense of agency. And what I mean by this is um, trying to help clients identify concrete therapeutic goals, and also how they can be tailored to this particular client's experiences. Um, South Asian cultures being collectivist can be kind of a double-edged sword. I've had a lot of second generation younger clients who express kind of a tension between meeting my parents' expectations or meeting my family's expectations and what I want to do. So where can we meet both of those in the middle? Um, and then examining early childhood experiences and attachments. So what was what was it like growing up for example, in an immigrant household? What was it like maybe moving from South Asia to the US? How did that change your early childhood attachments? Um, and where do you see some of those attachments now? Um, and then narrative and constructionist approaches. Again, I think these have been very helpful in my work with South Asian clients. So helping them reauthor, rewrite their relationship with their culture, or what they want it to be in the present. And I also just want to mention, I work with adults, so I don't really have experience working with youth. So you might need to tailor those strategies to make them more specific to younger clients. Um, and then I already mentioned examining the tension between cultures, if it exists. Again, it doesn't exist for everybody, and it won't come into play for every single client. And it's not helpful to make an assumption there that just because someone is from a minoritized group doesn't mean that they do struggle uh, with these tensions. Really, again, needs to be tailored to the individual client. Um, and the last one here is building tangible coping strategies or coping structures that rely on culturally embedded practices. Um, I mentioned earlier that I like to take a strengths-based approach, looking at clients' resiliencies, um, practices that they already incorporate in their self-care, and see how it can be incorporated into therapy, and how their culture plays a role in that. So maybe examining things like how did your parents or how did your family cope with stress if they did? What impact has that had on you? And then what are some cultural practices that you already incorporate or want to incorporate in the future? Um, and I really want to caution against prescribing things to your clients. So I don't think you're going to get very far if you prescribe every South Asian client to attend yoga, right? Like that's not going to be relevant to every person. Not everybody is going to want to do that. But there can be a lot of very healing practices within every unique cultural community. And something that I've done with clients too who are maybe feeling a little bit disconnected from those practices is and want to find their way back is researching with them. I might not know a lot of specific practices within their community, but let's find them together. Let's find ways of bringing those back in. And I also want to mention a few South Asian American organizations. There are more organizations than just this very brief list. But I think this is a good starting point. So Apnakar, which is based in Chicago, primarily serves low-income South Asian immigrants in New York City. And then South Asian Council for Social Services, which is also based in New York. And yeah, Apnakar, as I mentioned, is geared towards ending gender-based violence. And API Chaya, which is based in Seattle. I want to give a special shout out, which Seattle is where I'm based. Um, this was API Chaya was founded by the history of working in with survivors of domestic violence. Okay, and here are a collection of resources for you to refer back to. Yeah, I would highly recommend exploring some of these. Um, okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and look at the chat. Okay, so there is a question, is Myanmar reviewed in Eastern Asian studies? That's what I've found. I actually do work with I have worked with clients from Myanmar, but studies about clients from Myanmar would I think be more included um, in studies about other regional groups. It might be more helpful to get specific and search for studies specifically related um, to clients from Myanmar. I agree. I think there's also the attitude that coming from a background of lack of resources, slash our parents and grandparents had it much worse. So what right do we have to be depressed? Yes, I definitely have seen this tendency, especially within second generation South Asians, is, my parents or grandparents immigrated here and they sacrificed so much. And why am I now depressed and why am I now anxious? What right do I have to those feelings? Absolutely, that comes up a lot. Um, and something I try to emphasize in when that does come up is, um, just because someone else had it quote unquote worse than you, doesn't mean that you are not entitled to have your feelings. Um, and their journeys also had a big impact on you, especially if you were constantly hearing things like, you need to be grateful, or again, that might be a message that they received, is what right do you have to be depressed? How has that impacted you? Yeah. And then can you speak to South Asian cultural attitudes towards aging, death, and existential stressors? Yeah, that's a great question. I also saw there was a list of questions submitted when people signed up for this webinar about religious practices for the sick and dying. Um, yeah, and this is a really fascinating area. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. This is a really fascinating area, and death and existential stressors are treated very differently in South Asia than they are in the West. Something that I experienced when there was a death in my family is there is kind of a collective mourning. And this might seem odd in a Western context, but I come from specifically a Hindu family. I'm not religious anymore, but you know, I think this was a very special experience to have. When my grandmother passed away, her body was brought back home, and we got to spend time with her. And I think it helps you grieve in a lot of ways. I remember we were sitting there, even though we were like crying and quite distressed. There was like a lot of reminiscing about our experiences with her. Um, And yeah, the culturally specific practices are quite different. And again, I'm sure they're different and unique depending on your client's specific regional cultural background. Um, are you aware of any culture-specific suicide prevention approaches? Great question. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, unfortunately. I think this is an area that needs more specific research. Like I mentioned, suicide is South Asian women are at an elevated risk for suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. Something that I've experienced or have encountered in my clinical work is the methods of suicide might be quite different within a South Asian context. So I have read about and have also worked with clients who have swallowed poison or bleach. And I think that um, safety planning needs to be kind of geared more culturally to be more culturally specific. So something like using a gun might not be as common in the South Asian context. And I also want to say this is more anecdotal from my clinical experience. I think there should be some more resources about this. And then what can trauma-informed care look like specifically for South Asians in the US, and what are ways to affirm them? Feelings of grief, fear, shame. Yeah, this is something that I do a lot in my work. Um, there is there is a lot of conflict about, my family or my parents might have treated me in specific ways, but they are my elders and I have to respect them. So there can be a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of conflict between those two separate ideas. And something I like to emphasize to my clients is we can hold contradiction, and human beings are full of contradiction and paradox. And you can hold these two ideas at the same time. Your parents could have harmed you a lot, and you can also respect them and love them. And the ways in which they harmed you can be quite damaging. And you're, again, entitled to have those feelings. I have worked with my clients to create boundaries, and I know this is kind of a scary word within the South Asian community. Anecdotally speaking, parents of my clients can get they can be very unsure about what that means. But boundaries don't necessarily mean that they cut off their parents or they don't speak to them anymore. Rather, it means how can I engage with this person and still have them in my life in a more responsible way that honors both me and them. Um, and I do try and emphasize that the concept of rigid boundaries, so you don't let anyone in, and completely porous boundaries where you let everything in. There is a middle to be had there. And that's kind of going back to what I said about fostering a sense of agency, especially, when you're an adult, you you get to choose how you live your life, even within your culture. And that doesn't mean that you, like I said, cut off your parents. Might mean you engage with them in a different way. Um, yeah, I think those are all the questions.
Thank you. We'll see if some more roll in here in a minute. Goodness, you brought up so much information and I loved it. It just made me think of clients I've had in the past or family members I've worked with. Um, so thank you. I loved that you brought, history into this as well. It gives us, who don't know a lot about the history, I guess another way of looking or reaching our clients, thinking about that possible generational trauma
Mhm.
that comes with them. Um, and you had touched really briefly also on, I see we had another question come in, but really quickly, sorry, family roles in therapy. I just kind of wanted to go back to that just a little bit. You had mentioned kind of boundaries. Is there any other information, like when you are seeing somebody South Asian, the family comes in as well with them on, how
Mhm.
to address boundaries, possible expectations,
Mhm.
and then paperwork wise, we all know if you're working in an
Mhm.
agency, you have to have that
Mhm.
release of information, but
Yes.
explaining that to family members while also,
Mhm.
working with your client. Do you have any
Mhm.
expertise or knowledge?
Yeah, I've actually had clients come in with their parents, or even elderly clients come in with their kids. Something that I found is me being South Asian can help kind of foster that sense of trust. I noticed the minute I start speaking Hindi or Bengali, which are the two South Asian languages that I speak, there's kind of like, oh, you're South Asian too. And there is kind of a sense of trust and a sense of belonging of like, you understand where we're coming from. And I think we need more South Asian clinicians in the field. Um, and that's something that's very important. Something that I do with my older clients or parents of clients is talk about your mental health is related to your physical health, and I try and relate it back to that somatization. So, if you're experiencing these headaches or GI distress or nausea, or you're having these aches and pains, maybe it's related to more than just your physical health. And that's not to take away from like the real physical health distress. It's more so to honor it. And if you're experiencing this, what might it be like for your kids? Um, and I think kind of taking that step in the right direction. And this is something that is changing, I've noticed, both in South Asia and also in the diaspora. It is changing. People are becoming a little bit more aware and cognizant. And then when I do have parents or kids or relatives come in, always getting that ROI, especially if you're at an agency. So from a paperwork perspective, family therapy is something that is recommended for South Asians. I don't have expertise in that. I'm an individual therapist, so I might have a family member join for like an intake or a one-off session, but nothing more long term.
Great. Great. Thank you.
Mhm.
We do have a couple more questions in here too.
Yes.
In your work with South Asian populations, do you think that they would generally be open to virtual treatment and services? And if not, how can we encourage engagement in these forms of care for South Asian, so that culturally
Mhm.
competent care is more accessible?
Mhm. Yeah. With virtual treatment, I have noticed that a lot of my second generation clients might prefer that. It just makes it easier for them, especially with busy working schedules. With some of my older clients, I have connected with them over the phone, especially if they have disabilities or physical health issues that might prevent them from coming in. Um, and it really depends on like on the individual client. Some people really just prefer to see you in person, and it feels a little bit easier for them. Had with a South Asian client who, expressed some kind of distrust in mental health care services, and we did kind of a collaborative effort in getting her the treatment that she needed. So having me, who she had already met, her case manager on the line, kind of talking together, helped break down those barriers. That might not have been the specific question that you had, but I think virtual treatment can help, just maybe tiptoe into the mental health space a little bit more easily. Then I see the other one. Can you speak to the disconnect between first or second generation born South Asian youth and older generations when addressing access to mental health care resources slash needs in the presence of a high level of ambivalence or refusal by youth? Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experiences with clients under 18. Yeah, I would recommend you search for resources specific to that age group. And like I mentioned earlier, second generation clients, I think, are a little bit more willing to access resources. Um, but getting the first generation or older clients just used to the idea of like, this is something that you can talk about too. I've had clients who will mention their experiences with partition, and it's the first time that they've ever talked about that with anybody. Um, and kind of framing it as this is a way for you to relieve yourself of some of these burdens that you've been carrying around. And I want to hear it. Being South Asian definitely helps because, again, there's kind of that implicit trust. So, yeah.
And somebody had put in the chat, thinking the factor
Mhm.
that many live with parents until marriage. So it's something to consider as a provider as well,
Mhm.
thinking about families.
Yes, definitely. It is common, and it is also very common for families to, we call it a joint family system. So that means members of your extended family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins can all live in the same household. And yeah, it is very common for people to live with their parents, especially if you're a woman, to live with their parents until you get married. It is a little different, I've noticed, for second generation Indian Americans or South Asian Americans. But it can still happen. I do have clients that are older or that are not married and they're living with their parents, and it's kind of just a question of what do you how do you feel about that? It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be a problem in all instances.
Um, you had spoke earlier about, let me find my notes here really quick. Um, Religious and spiritual beliefs and how that can
Mhm.
come into someone's thoughts, feelings, or beliefs, of their mental illness and how they see that. And
Mhm.
it made me think
Mhm.
directly of someone who has psychosis, and that religious,
Mhm.
spiritual belief can sometimes come in strongly for someone
Mhm.
experiencing psychosis. Do you have
Mhm.
any recommendations or thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had this experience too, and it really helped, I think, just having that cultural awareness in that instance, because the client was reporting something about a specific deity, about a specific goddess, and it was coming at a time where they were going through a lot of stress. And yeah, I think getting a clearer idea of exactly what they're referring to, like if it is psychotic symptoms, what are you seeing? What exactly are you experiencing? The thing that you're seeing, what does it look like? And maybe working back from there can help. Um, and yeah, it can be really scary. It can also, like the instance with my client, it can come up in times of stress where people are maybe feeling kind of a loss of control. I've seen it happen, especially in situations where people might have just moved and are going through that acculturative stress. They might be isolated, and it might be kind of a feeling of comfort almost. Like I'm seeing this figure that is familiar to me in this completely unfamiliar environment. Um, and yeah, what is that experience like for that client?
I think that's a good point to bring up, though. Seeing that doesn't mean that it can be
Mhm.
stressful. I mean, it could be a good calming
Mhm.
thing. So, yes, diving
Mhm.
more into it. Um, in your intro and in your bio, you had said that you work with South Asian communities and then also queer communities. And I was wondering if you
Mhm.
could talk a little bit about the intersection between working with those two communities, and how
Mhm.
you work with them.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I love working with a queer community. I identify as queer myself. And it is very fulfilling, especially to work with South Asian queer clients. Queerness in South Asia is something that has existed as long as South Asia has existed. There are sculptures at temples that depict queer relationships. There are so many historical records, so many references in scripture to queer relationships. Homosexuality was criminalized in India, starting with British rule, and it was decriminalized, I believe, in 2018. But it continues to be criminalized in other South Asian countries. And I think really talking to clients about the way it might look for other people, and really emphasizing safety. I do talk about these connections to history of like this is not something that's new. Our culture has always there are deities in Hinduism that are androgynous. Um, and that can, I think, be a source of comfort of there's nothing wrong with me, of course. Um, and kind of exploring that space. There are a lot of Desi is kind of an in-group word for South Asian. Desi queer spaces that I encourage clients to explore, even if they can't come out to their families. And that coming out does not need to be a requirement. It is always important that the client remains safe, and then maybe slowly explore what that could look like.
Thank you so much. I see lots of reactions of love. This is great. This has been great. If there's any more questions, please do put them in the Q&A. And right now I'm going to share my slide really quickly to put up our QR code for our evaluation. Bear with me here real quick, because I know some people may have to leave early. So please do fill out the evaluation. Like you said, it really does help us, helps our presenters as well. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here today. Really, really appreciate it. Yes, I'm seeing tons of thank yous. I hope you have your chat up, Atrayee. Thank you, everyone, for being here.